Good evening, spiritual warriors. Welcome. Feel like saying welcome back. And I do mean welcome back. And I'm thankful to be back myself. I'm hoping that you were able to hear some previous broadcasts, so it wasn't a complete blank. I traveled my first week. I was preparing for travel to a Japa retreat in Philadelphia at a place called the Elkin Estates. And the next week I was at that retreat, and on the Friday was our second day of silence and chanting 64 rounds. It was quite a wonderful experience. Developing a relationship with the Holy Name. That was the introductory talk, our relationship with the Holy Name. So if you're chanting devotees or non-devotees as well, if you're chanting, do realize that the Holy Name is non-different from Krishna, and you are developing a relationship, and he hears your chanting, and he's pleased, and he's there for your protection and caring. So much came through that I want to say it had me breathless, which literally I was for a while. It wasn't from ecstasy at the moment, it was just the activity. But I'm back now and endeavoring to practice what I've learned and encourage those who are chanting to chant and hear the Holy Name and develop that wonderful relationship. So here we are. We were discussing, hearing, and reading from Spiritual Warrior 4. And I had begun the chapter in chapter 2, choosing love over fear. And as we're going to continue tonight, when I do a review for myself before, and I'm saying, oh my gosh, I didn't remember that. Oh, I wonder if they remembered. But we want to move ahead. What I will do is give the opening Sastra verse that Bhakti Tirtha Swami gave. Oh, I just realized I'm dressed for battle tonight. I've got my Spiritual Warrior shirt on, and hope that encourages all you spiritual warriors to be ready for the battlefield. The scripture quoted here is from Srimad Bhagavatam 5, Canto 5, Chapter 6, Text 5, which states, "The mind is the root cause of lust, anger, pride, greed, lamentation, and fear. Combined, these constitute bondage to fruitive activity." What learned man would put faith in the mind? And that's the text, and I have the purport from Srila Prabhupada. This is the purport to that particular text. He states, "The mind is the original cause of material bondage. It is followed by many enemies, such as anger, pride, greed, lamentation, illusion, and fear. The best way to control the mind is to engage it always in Krishna consciousness." And next to that, in parenthesis, is the Sanskrit of the first line for Srimad Bhagavatam 9:4-18, which is the story of Ambarish Maharaj who is known for being able to use his whole being in service to Krishna. If you remember, his eyes, his ears, hearing about the Lord, his mouth glorifying the Lord. So it's a perfect example of really the best way to control the mind. So it's Srimad Bhagavatam 9, chapter 4, text 18, if you want to look that up and go into it in more detail. Prabhupada continues the purport by stating, since the followers of the mind bring about material bondage, we should be very careful not to trust the mind. That's a wonderful statement to remember. So we're going to go back, and there's one thing I noticed that I had made a note, and I don't know if I did. So let's look at it again, and before we go on. He mentions to us, if we recall, that the Vedic scriptures describe specific types of miseries or fears that attack all living entities, regardless of their race or tribe or gender or wherever you live. You remember what those are? The basic miseries? They're known as what? Can't hear you. Okay. Adhyatmika, which refers to attacks or fears created by one's own mind. And Adidaivika, which comes from the devas or demigods in the environment, such as hurricane, tornadoes, earthquakes, droughts. We've been having a lot of those. Floods. They're known as Adidaivika. And then the last type is called Adibhotika. And that results from interaction with other people and really comes from disappointment and disturbances. But it's all in a part of the process of socialization. And he had told us that at a retreat he had some students and he asked them to make notes. So I'm going to just do that with you. I don't expect to get an answer, but maybe you could look at these three categories and to list your greatest fears from each of the three categories. Okay? And this will help you maybe, because some things are really deep down and just brushing over them or hearing them one time. But if you take the time to go deeper, you can clear out many areas that may be obstacles or blockages to advancing spiritually. So he says each person has their own stock of fears, and they carry with them everywhere. So you want to really look at. So look at that. Adhyatmika, your own mind, fears from your own mind. Adidaivika, what in the environmental or from the demigods that you're fearful of. And of course, Adibhotika, interaction with people and the whole socialization. And just work on those questions, which will take us, then while you're doing that, not now while we're talking, please, but do it in your spare time, or if you feel so inclined to do. Tonight we're going to look at the section called Hope and Fear. He tells us that we can make a distinct correlation between fear and hope. Now, during that same workshop where he gave that exercises I just mentioned to you, some of the students there shared their one greatest fear, which might belong to any one of the three categories. Several responses included a fear of uncertainty in life, a fear of the death of one's children or mother, and a fear of a spiritual fall down. He says that by analyzing each of these fears, their connection to hope will manifest more clearly. Because someone might feel fearful or of uncertainty. And if he reflects on his greatest hope, he would probably want certainty in his life. The person who fears a spiritual fall down probably intensely hopes to never stray from the spiritual path. The devotee who fears abandonment from her spiritual master would most desire to have her spiritual master always present. Now, fear of death is rather natural, since no one lives forever, but it should not be excessive. So from these examples, we can see that our greatest desire will often oppose our greatest fear. Our fears often resolve around those things we most value. For instance, we may fear that a situation will not unfold according to our desires. And we often place so much of our mental energy in such an anxiety. Don't we? We do that, right? You want it to happen. You have a desire. And yet, for some reason, instead of seeing it happen, praying that it happens, preparing for it to happen, we put so much energy into what if it doesn't happen. I'll feel bad. And what? And this can cause quite a bit of anxiety. He says this type of mentality is dangerous because if it begins to encompass us and form a part of our internal dialogue. Remember, we went through that internal dialogue. We may even cause our worst fears to manifest. And then what do we say? I knew it would happen. Of course, you put all your energy into it. You spend all your time thinking of it, what you didn't want to happen. And the Lord is so kind and merciful, that which you give attention to, that's your desire, He fulfills it. Think about that. That's why Prabhupada said you can't trust the mind. You think the mind is going to hear what you're thinking, and yet the better thing is going to happen. No, you have to put there what you want. So he said, the mind is even more powerful than our physical actions and our speech. The subconscious mind does not always recognize the difference between a positive and a negative. It simply hears the continuous flow of thoughts. What have you been putting your energy, what thoughts have you been putting energy into today, yesterday? This is what being mindful really means. For instance, if we try to overcome an addiction but just continue to repeatedly tell ourselves to stop the bad habit, our constant meditation on it may what? It may even lead to more of the same negative pattern. So you want to stop a bad habit, you see yourself doing the good habit. And thinking, I will do this, I will, and you make it an affirmative statement of an action to oppose that which you want to get rid of. So the ball is really in our court. It's our mind, our consciousness. Nobody else can change that for us. All they can do is encourage us towards that. But we have to take the action. He says that the subconscious mind normally only receives an impression of what you present to it, instead of distinguishing between the negative and the positive. Okay? You've got something to work with there. Further divisions of fear, he says, we can divide fear into 5 other distinct categories. We do not simply want to make a psychological presentation, but this information may prove to be a valuable asset for those of you on the spiritual path, because it can enable you to help others. And if you've noticed throughout his teachings, he's always talking about reaching a point of helping others. It's not an I, me. But we have to work on ourselves internally and clear away the obstacles and those things that would prevent us from helping ourselves be that strong person. And then from that, we can help others, because you will have had the experience of the change and how it was accomplished, and then you can encourage others to do that. So he tells us that although it is helpful to understand how fear can affect you, such knowledge will also help you understand the symptoms that people have when they suffer from these attacks. See? So once you've been through your experience and seen how you could correct it based on the teachings of the Sastra and Guru and Sadhu, and you've consciously made your effort and seen how it works, you can help others and encourage others. So he says here, we want to act as spiritual warriors in order to counteract some of the negativity that is sweeping the world. And that's what we've been talking about for, can you believe it, almost 2 years. Next month, November, I have been sitting here and bringing you the teachings and words of His Holiness Bhaktitirtha Swami, in hopes the first objective is to please him and serve him, but to help others, as he said. And I also would like to request those of you that have been around for the almost 2 years listening, or any period of time, I've asked for this before and I'll put it out there again, to share, if you care to, any aspect of these technologies, techniques, commentaries, suggestions from Bhaktitirtha Swami that you've been able to apply in your life and have seen change, or even have been able to use with others. Because we've gone through different chapters in 6 spiritual warrior books. And there's still, as you see, we're back to number 4. Now, for those of you who don't go into the chat room, and I respect that. But I know that you're out there. Send me an email if you care to. And that's Mother Indrani 108 at gmail.com. And I'd really, as I said, it's almost 2 years. And in the beginning I was, waiting for some feedback. And it says, I tried to follow the scriptures. You do your best and do your service and not, be anxious for results or even worry about the results. And that has given me the courage and desire to continue with this. But I would like to know, if you feel so inclined, any way that these studies, discussions have helped, and even if it's encouraged you to get the Spiritual Warrior books if you didn't have them before. Okay, so I'm putting that out. If you want those in chat room to make comment, or you can too also email to me and just let me know. And then I'll tell Bhakti Tirtha Swami, because he sits here with me every week. And as I say, my desire is to please him. Okay? So right now he has divided fear into 5 distinct categories, which he lists as this. Number 1, general anxieties. Now they have a strong effect on the mind and body, and even interfere with a person's spiritual life. General anxieties often lead to insomnia and sometimes nightmares. It can affect the heart or lead to fainting spells, dizziness, trembling. Such anxieties can also make people very fearful in their relationships. Now, as he said, we do not simply want to make a psychological presentation, but this information may prove to be valuable asset for those of you on a spiritual path, because it can enable you to help others. You can recognize these. And then if you're following his techniques, technologies, and your scriptural sadhana, you will be able to possibly help and encourage others in a calm way. Number 2, panic is a part of the manifestation of the culture of fear on this planet. Some people even suffer from a specific disorder known as panic attacks. The symptoms include headaches, shortness of breath, nausea, sweating, quivering, shaking, heart palpitations, and vomiting. A person may feel as though they might die. These are very serious symptoms that affect the mind and body and can even extend for a long period of time. Millions of people suffer from these types of attacks or will suffer from them in the next few years. Now again, as he said, symptoms affect the mind and body. If we've been following these series, he has presented to us from, the very first classes I did were on the 12 qualities of a spiritual warrior. We spent some time on mastery of the mind. He continually, if you've been paying attention, following, tells us how to deal with that mind so that we can master it and get it under control, and it possibly won't take us out into areas like this. But he's giving these so we can recognize these, as he said, in others as spiritual warriors. Number 3, he says, is that millions of people suffer from obsessive compulsive disorders, which also manifest from fear. These obsessive compulsive activities occur in some people who feel forced to constantly do the same activity over and over. They simply cannot avoid the behavior. For example, a person might be afraid of contacting a disease. Therefore, what do? They're washing their hands constantly. And another person may be afraid to leave a door unlocked, and as a result, he or she must check the door repeatedly before leaving the home. Now, even though they might recognize such behavior to be rational, they simply cannot control themselves. Since they have imbibed the culture of fear, they simply act according. You hear that? They've imbibed the culture of fear. Number 4 are phobias, which can have a devastating effect on a person's life. A person who suffers from phobias must live every day under the influence of heavy fears. For instance, some people are afraid of heights. Others are afraid of small or confined spaces. A claustrophobic may not be able to sit in a crowded room for even a short period of time. If they do manage to stay in the room, they would probably have to sit near a door so that they could easily escape in an emergency. When they end up in a confined room that does not have an escape route, they may sweat, shake, faint, or vomit out of fear. And number 5 is post-traumatic stress, which results from a previous trauma or hurt. For instance, reports indicate that 20% of women and 5 to 10% of men experience some form of sexual abuse as children, which means that many young girls and boys must deal with these issues. Since their so-called protectors exploited them, many of them lack trust in authority and cannot really give themselves in a relationship. Many of them feel intense fear and anger towards themselves and towards others. They even have to deal with dysfunctional issues in terms of sex life due to post-traumatic effects that carry over. And some people suffer from this fear to such an extent that it acts as an anchor and forces them to relive that experience again and again. Now, as he said, these are, he's presenting this not to make a psychological presentation, but this information may prove to be a value asset for those of you on the spiritual path, because it can enable you to help others. And if not, then you would have to refer them for other help. Now, millions of people in America alone suffer from fear in these particular ways. Unfortunately, as these people interact, they drop their fears into the environment and onto their associates. For instance, parents who carry these anxieties with them end up dropping these negative emotions directly onto their children or spouse. And a phobic person is rarely able to fully present or sufficiently loving sense to be fully present or sufficiently loving since they are emotionally shut down. People suffering from wounds cannot give their full love, especially if they're afraid to open their hearts or to honestly address their past. We cannot raise our own consciousness sufficiently or the consciousness of others if the duality of fear and aggression has captured our minds. Fear may follow. Fear allows Maya or evil to enter deep into a person's consciousness because it destroys the shield of love that blocks or eliminates the attack. Once the shield of love disintegrates, the fear will increase and present its stronger attacks. We do not want to allow fear's attacks to wound or devastate us. Therefore, we must constantly strengthen our internal constitution. Tonight, when I was again reviewing, and I was thinking maybe one might ask how he's saying this so simply, choosing love over fear. But again, as I've said, he's given us so much in our books, and of course I can't hold it all. I wish I had a photogenic memory. But those of you that were with us in when we were doing Spiritual Warrior 2, Transforming Lust into Love, if you recall, the very first chapter was called The School of Love. And he starts there, he tells us that life is a school of love. And in this school, we're not just hungry, but starving for love. But then he goes on to tell us that it's very difficult if you're hungry and you're not getting the proper food. But he says, we realize that our real nourishment and shelter is love because the soul is made for love. So when he's bringing up throughout this, and he's talking about love, I remember in that number 6, Spiritual Warrior, he's talking about war and terrorism. And he keeps bringing love in because that's who we are. He says ultimately life is about spiritual expression, which involves completeness, knowledge, and happiness. And these spiritual expressions will manifest as we recognize our eternal nature. So it's about that knowledge, and that's what we start Bhagavad Gita. Krishna is making it clear to Arjuna, who's showing fear, right? He was quite fearful to go on the battlefield. He didn't want to kill his relatives, worrying about what would happen with the women and the children, remember? And Krishna says to him, you call yourself an intelligent man, but you don't know the difference between the material and the spiritual. So just having gone through these types of division of fears, it's to know that this can happen. But if you're on the spiritual path, if you've been studying and you're studying and desiring, and you get to know the basic, as he says, we recognize our eternal spiritual nature. We are eternal beings, which means that we are not meant to have temporary experiences. So this teaching, this philosophy, can help us to move through these fears. But one thing he does, he puts it in our face so we can see it. Are we caught there? Are we heading for that? Are we coming out of that? And then we go back to the techniques and technology. There was one other point. He says that we do a lot of pretending and playing God instead of recognizing that we are made for love. And that we are loved deeper and than we could ever imagine by the Supreme. So that basic knowledge, I'm an eternal being, spirit, soul, and my relationship is with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And as he tells us in Bhagavad Gita 5th, I'm in everyone's heart. He's in our heart. He's our protector. As we imbibe this and grasp this and follow the sastras, the scriptures, and endeavor to live it, these kinds of conditions, if they try to come up, we have something to battle them with. That's why we're called spiritual warriors. And you can go back to past programs, as I did. I think the first few programs were on the qualities of a spiritual warrior, and then the next were on Spiritual Warrior 2 and the School of Love, which is a fantastic chapter. So we're looking at okay, where do we go now? He says, due to very devastating experiences that spiritual seekers can encounter while serving in spiritual communities and institutions, which can later lead to serious post-traumatic stress. We want to elaborate on this fear in more detail. Many people suffer from these traumatic experiences due to abuse and exploitation that they underwent within religious communities. He doesn't bite his tongue. If you've noticed in his writings, he will present what the situation is in a straightforward way, because we have to look at it so that we can then make effort to change our consciousness so that we can become who we really are. Now, he says, in such cases, overcoming the problem will become more challenging because the person will have a harder time taking shelter of the religion or institution. The person might even undergo this intense experience when he or she enters the environment or participates in certain religious practices. Therefore, we want to offer ways in which such persons can regain their faith. This is what he does. He puts it out there. This is what it is. But there's a way, as he says here, to offer ways to regain faith and to move through the situation so we don't become stagnant in it and relive it over and over. He says it's most unfortunate when a person fears the exact medicine that will keep him or her, help him or her. First, we will put forth two secular examples and then two spiritual examples of such situations to help us understand how post-traumatic stress develops. In our first scenario, Jim needs to swim constantly since he is the captain of the swimming team. However, due to a particular trauma that happened to him in the water several years ago, he has developed a fear of water and feels intense stress when he comes close to large bodies of water. Another example involves Dr. Goldman, a surgeon who used to operate on a daily basis. However, due to an abuse perpetrated by his supervisor whenever he entered the operation room, he experienced post-traumatic stress and had to quit his job. Those are two circular. The two other scenarios involve abuse within religious communities. Mary attended a convent, and during a retreat, an elderly nun molested her. Consequently, she now experiences post-traumatic stress attacks whenever she sees any nuns over 40 years of age. Our last example involves a Brahmin who was studying in an ashram in Europe under the guidance of a seemingly very powerful guru. He later found out that his guru was deviating in many ways, which caused some internal turmoil. Since he had causing some internal turmoil, he later found out that Guru was deviating in many ways, which caused some internal turmoil since he had deep faith in the Guru and had fully accepted him as his mentor. After hearing of these deviations, he fell into depression for quite some time. Although he had been able to somewhat cope with his depressions, he has not been able to transcend his post-traumatic stress attacks, which he encounters every time he enters into a temple and sees certain aspects of spiritual culture that remind him of his guru. Now, after examining a few ways in which post-traumatic stress can develop, we will provide some considerations to help people through these difficult moments. We especially want to look at ways to help those having anxiety attacks and great fear due to similarly inauspicious experiences that happen to them in connection with spiritual communities or institutions. It is very difficult for anyone suffering from abuse or exploitation in any form. However, it is even worse when a person's life or profession has been altered due to such atrocities. Unfortunately, it is most devastating for those who have lost faith in the spiritual journey, are afraid to engage in spiritual practices, or fear spiritual association that could move them distinctly forward towards self-actualization. The following techniques can help a person deal with post-traumatic stress associated with such problems. Now, it's 8:47. What I'm going to do, there's 10 of these, and hopefully you're listening and may know people. What I'll do in the time left, I will just read what it is, and then next week we will go through them again and read his comments. How is that? Okay. I guess I'll do it since I can't hear your responses. Is there any questions or comments? No. Okay, what I'm going to do, as he said, he wants to look at ways to help those having anxiety attacks and great fear due to inauspicious experiences, because it is difficult for anyone suffering from abuse or exploitation. And of course it's unfortunate and most devastating for those who have lost faith in the spiritual journey. So he's going to give techniques that can help a person deal with post-traumatic stress. So what I'm going to do is, I say, I'll read the 10 items, and then next week when we come back we can go over them again, and you may have some questions, because some of these I can just offer you what he's bringing to you through his books. Number 1, scrutinize the philosophy in order to determine whether or not it is inherently unhealthy. That's the philosophy of the institution or spiritual organization. Number 2, understand the difference between the philosophy and the deviation. Number 3, reflect on the many good experiences within the community. Number 4, practice forgiveness. Number 5, allow cognitive reconditioning. Number 6, visualize yourself in the environment. Number 7, visit the environment with a loved one. Number 8, study the saints of the theology closer. Number 9, pray and ask God for help. Number 10, know that God does not want you to live in fear. So that's something to think about if you've been following this, and you may remember people or friends who have come up with this post-traumatic stress. And as I say, next week we'll go through them again and read his commentary. But I'm going to end this section of this chapter titled Choosing Love Over Fear.
Can you repeat number 8?
Number 8, study the saints of the theology closer. Okay, how many in the chat room? Same 3. Welcome to you in the chat room. I thank you for being there. It's always wonderful to know that the spiritual warriors are out. And this has been quite an intense chapter, but he gives us, because the next sections is, he gives us consequences of fear and endeavor for transformation rather than reformation, and love versus fear. So it goes deeper, but it's given us something to think about. And if we look at our own fears under the different those 3 areas, and try to get find out what our fears are on a deeper subconscious level, and realize, as we've said, that we are made for love, and that love is what we really are, and that we are truly loved by the Supreme. And if we're chanting that name, we will feel that love, and it'll begin to raise up and begin to remove these stresses and strains. So, any comment whatsoever before I close from those in our chat room?
Earlier you had asked how the weekly broadcasts have helped anyone.
Yes.
Bhuvan Mohan commented. And Shruti agreed that there has been a lot that I've applied and had good results.
Thank you. And I feel like saying, as a teacher, at some point maybe you could choose one that you've applied and describe what that one was and how it helped. You can write to me or post it in the chat room, and that might even help others who are watching. I was very pleased, I guess it's a good way to put it, at the Japa retreat. There were 2 Matajis who said to me, I watched your program on Friday nights. I really like it. So I know there are devotees and individuals out there who don't come into the chat room, and I thank you for being there. And as I said, prayerfully, you're getting something to help you in your spiritual life, advancement and growth. And if you feel so inclined, you can send me an email at motherindrani108@gmail.com, and we can talk there. So I thank you all for being there. I'm thankful to be back, and hopefully continue to be here, good Lord willing, if Krishna wants it that way, and to continue to share with you the teachings of His Holiness Bhaktitirtha Swami, so that you can advance spiritually and become, as Srila Prabhupada says, fully Krishna conscious this lifetime. Thank you all. Have a wonderful week. Hare Krishna.